Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Hopefully you're all getting connected and audioed up. We're going to wait for a few more people to join us first. My name is Steve. I'm going to be moderating today, so that means I'll be helping out with any questions, supplying links where needed, driving the polls and managing the breakout rooms. So if you have any questions, you can DM me in the chat. You should see me as host or English Speaking Union as the person in the participants. We will be recording today, so I hope that's okay for everybody. The breakout rooms, what I'll do is we'll have a certain amount of time in them. I shall pop in and out and check out how everyone's doing, but I'll just give you a quick 60 seconds timer when we're about to finish those, so you can wrap up any chats you've got. And if there's anything you want to ask, just put your hand up if everyone knows how to do that. Obviously, on a video, it works as fine, or there's the little emoji you can use, and we can make sure everyone gets the I get the questions answered. So while we're waiting for the last few to join, I'm just going to pop up a poll. Can I just check? Okay. Somebody on our team has logged in using the same login details as me. So currently I can't use the polls.
Jess, Chelsea? I'm just having a look. I don't think I'm logged in. I'm logged in on my one.
Yeah, I think so, of myself as well.
Okay. Let me just try this.
Steve, let me leave, and if it then works, just message me.
Sure.
Steve, would you like me to try the same?
No, I don't think it'll be you. I'm not sure. It just says I've logged in from another device. Your polling session is inactive. So somebody else has. I can't log out, otherwise we'll lose the meeting, I'm afraid. So what we'll have to do.
I'll check to see if it's my other laptop, even though it's closed down. I wonder whether that.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think, well, what we'll do is while we're waiting, let's do it the old-fashioned way. So I'm going to ask some questions, and if you could put it into the chat, that would be great. So our questions are, could you let us know what your role is as part of this subject within your school or department or establishment? That'd be great. That's great. See you back in. And then the second question, please, is when it comes to the subject we're talking about today, are you A, not very confident, really looking for some support, B, doing okay, or C, yeah, kind of confident, we've got this tackled? So not very confident, confident, very confident. If you could give a sense of that, then that would be great. I can collect all the details from the chat. Okay, we have got a couple more expecting to come, but I think if we probably kick off and they can come in. So yes, thank you very much. I can see the answers coming in. That's great. I'll pass you on to Kat now, who will be presenting today. So Kat, if you want to present your screen.
It's disabled screen sharing again.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. My name's Kat Marshall-Lamb. I've been a teacher for about 16, 17 years now. I've worked in London and now I'm working in the Southwest. And joining me in the final week of term for CPD really does show dedication, but it also reflects your commitment to your students and their outcomes. So our session on oracy in secondary schools is really aiming to ensure that we all understand what exactly it is that we are doing when it comes to oracy. We want to make sure that we understand not only what oracy is, but how we can approach this, and also give us a chance to share some ideas, some practical strategies of how we can develop this in our own settings as well. So my own interest in oracy kind of goes back at least 22 years now to my own school days, where I took part in the ESU and their Churchill public speaking competition. I was also a key member of the debate club after having taken part in the ESU, and actually that love of being in front of an audience, of enjoying public speaking, has helped shape my career in being a teacher. And it has meant that that's why I'm here for you today. So the ESU, some of you may already know and have a relationship and are starting to build your relationship with the ESU. And I love the fact that this educational charity, the founding of it really supports the understanding between people, which is so relative and such a social imperative at this current moment in time and in history. The better we could get along, and this idea for peace would be a really wonderful thing here in 2022. What I really love about the ESU as well is it goes from the classroom resources, but all up to national and international competitions and international links. And I really love that they're so committed to making sure that, you know, speaking, listening skills can be cross-cultural, and the ability to give students the opportunities to thrive. And I just think that's so incredibly important. But why focus on speaking and listening, and why is oracy so important to us then? And I appreciate the irony that we are looking at speaking, listening, spoken language and oracy in this very kind of didactic manner, which is very one way. But we've already had a little bit of play about with the chat, which is good, and I'm glad to hear your starting points. And it'll be really interesting to consider this as we continue, how you are going to be met with us at the start of your journey as well. So it would be really great if you could, in the chat then, just contribute. So what does oracy mean to you? Like currently, what is your understanding of what oracy means? So just into the chat, that'd be great. Thank you. So let's have a look. So what does oracy mean to you at the minute, too? So being able to communicate, and I really like that idea about being able to be fluent in it as well. Effective verbal communication. It's interesting, that word effective coming up twice already just from our first contributions. And I think that's important for us to understand that actually that it already opens up the fact that oracy just isn't just about talking. It's about how we use our speech, being able to communicate effectively, and being able to express ourselves, and that confidence of sharing your voice and views. And we're going to look today and see how that impacts our students, and actually why oracy is quite the buzzword, the area of focus that it needs to be currently as well. Okay, so what do we actually already know about oracy then? Well, oracy is often this kind of like amorphic, intangible entity that gets bandied around in classrooms. As classroom practitioners, we understand how important it is to get our students talking. But the term itself, what do we actually really know about it? Well, it only comes from the 1960s. So it actually still seems to be quite like a new field in so many ways. And oracy's emergence parallels much of today, and because actually it was a result of a report into how such an important life skill was being neglected. Arguably, has much even changed since the 1960s, particularly with the removal of the speaking and listening component from English, and also the content-heavy GCSEs, 1 to 9 GCSEs. In the last, how many years is that? 62 years. How much or how far have we actually come? Well, as a good English teacher, if we're thinking about oracy, and this is picking up on lots of the sentiments that you expressed in the chat yourself, we have to start with a definition, don't we? And we can see there that we've got the ability to express ourselves fluently and grammatically in speech. The ESU then picks up this as well, looking at the idea of expressing ourselves. And we're also concerned with how it's not just about expressing yourself, but it's your ability to structure your thoughts and make sense to others. So actually oracy enables us to be metacognitive people and allow our students to have those kind of communication and abilities to discuss their own learning as well. Robin Alexander, obviously from the University of Exeter, also comments about how it can enable emotional literacy and successful interactions with others. So when students don't have those good oracy skills, they're actually fundamentally going to struggle to make relationships with their peers and interact with one another. And we also know that when we discuss oracy, it's not just that. The College of Speech and Language Therapists go further, and they split it down into speech, being able to say the words and articulate them. It's also about the language, understanding what those words mean and the vocabulary that's going to be there as well. But also there's non-verbal elements as well. And talking about expressing ourselves fluently, it's about those skills that supplement those verbal communications, which allow us to be able to interact effectively with other people, and also to voice our own understanding and our own opinions as well. We already know that oracy is about learning to talk, but it's the other element as well that's really important for us, about how we learn through talk. And that is what we're going to be looking at as we carry on today. But we also know that's not just it. We know that as professionals, it's not just about speaking, is it? It's not just about how well we present things in a lesson. It has a much bigger and wider impact than that. we understand that in this phrase of levelling up, that actually it's an ability to compete and put yourself on an equal par with people from all different walks of life. So my school is a not yet a good school. We are a school in a town with 3 other secondary schools, but also 3 independent schools as well. And for me personally, ensuring that my students feel that they are worthy of having the same opportunities, the same confidence in their own voice and their own self-assuredness. Actually, that's kind of my moral imperative to why oracy is so important. I'm sure that's shared by some of you there as well. We also know that it's really important for students to be able to understand the world around us, and this idea about levelling up as well. There'll be more information about this as we carry on, but we know that children from a low-income household will usually start school with language levels that are below their more advantaged peers. Okay, so hopefully in reception in year 1 they can catch up. However, we know that's not always the case, and we know that those gaps continue to grow as children move through school as well. And sadly, for some of those children who persistently experience poverty, well, actually, they arrive at school, even before they get to school, behind and below the average level of language development as well. And then half of the children in an area of deprivation begin school with a delayed language understanding. So without that language and that limited vocabulary, it leads to a limited understanding, which ultimately leads to being limited engagement. And then eventually this idea of limited self-advocacy and agency as well. So oracy isn't just something that we need to bandy around in our classroom and make sure that we're putting into our schemes of learning. Actually, for lots of our students, it is fundamental to what they do and how they're going to succeed in the world, and how perhaps we can break cycles of poverty, deprivation and inequality as well. So my school has above average free school meals, pupil premium numbers, and it's really evident, and I'll go into this a little bit more as we carry on as well. So as part of this, we ended up having the all-party parliamentary group who launched a report, Speak for Change, and it started in 2019. And obviously, like many things that started in 2019, it was put on hold and delayed a little bit because of the pandemic. So the whole point of this study, this inquiry, was to look at this area of need, and we could see that there are so many socially disadvantaged students who need support through oracy. And there's evidence, there's so much evidence out there from the Education Endowment Foundation, the DfE's National Curriculum Assessments, the Educational Policy Institute, the Nuffield Foundation at the Manchester University, the Social Mobility Commission, and even the DfE's Key Stage 4 performance reviews. All of them flag up that students are making less progress and are significantly put on the back foot when they don't have strong speech and language and communication skills. And that link between students who are socially disadvantaged, their delayed social development, leads to those low skills with phonological awareness, and then later on that written world recognition. And I'm sure, like you or like me, you'll know that you see this in your classrooms. And this has obviously been impacted even further with the school closures in the past 2 years. I think it's really frightening to know, and I think what's been really great about the ESU's work in oracy and spoken language is the fact that now, and particularly for the last 16 years as a teacher, I've understood the importance of it. And I've been able to go, yeah, my students feel more confident. But actually what I really needed was a quantitative background and secure and rigorous research to back up what I was saying. And finally, due to the ESU and also the current focus on oracy across the country, as you can see in the APPG here as well, it's finally being recognised as the important factor and skill that it needs to. the children's, I think it's really important that we understand as well that students who become behind their peers by year 6 will start secondary school nearly 2 years behind their peers. And this is traced down to their language acquisition, their language skills, and all of those elements tied in together, because we understand and we know that it's not just one thing. And actually, that carries on. If they continue in a household of deprivation or free school meals for 20% of their schooling time, actually that gap just continues to increase. And really, whatever way that we look at it, this deprivation puts our students on the back foot. It puts them in a position of disadvantage. And then what happens? Well, COVID hits, doesn't it? And then we have further issues, don't we? And this gap has just continued to widen. When students don't perform very well at Key Stage 3, they continue to fall behind their peers, and they also show a deceleration in their progress, and linked again to their language acquisition, their language skills, they make a roughly 2 months less progress than their peers, and that gap just continues to widen as they go. So this means also there is disengagement as they carry on through school. There's links to exclusion rates, and students that are eligible for free school meals during Key Stage 4 are half as likely to achieve good passes at GCSEs than their more advantaged peers. You don't get good GCSEs, that disadvantage continues onto further education and jobs and opportunities out there. And all of this has been exacerbated by those school closures. I'm sure, like you, or for many of your students, if you work in a school similar to mine, trying to get children online to work, well, first of all, there was problems with access to devices. There was access to effective Wi-Fi. There was problems with access to space to study, and internet connectivity, parental support. The list goes on and on and on. And in my own experience, I just remember going from being in a classroom, which is always very loud and buzzing and exciting, and the discussion and the buzz of students learning, to a very solitary and quiet experience of students who didn't want to talk on mic, who were sometimes reluctant to work on the chat as well, although they did quite enjoy their polls and things like that. But what we do end up finding, though, is that for some students, we would have, sorry, what am I trying to say? That we would have issues with students taking part, and that even transferred back into the classroom when we returned. And I went again from having very noisy classrooms, classes that I taught for years, coming back very, very quiet and passive. And this doesn't even begin to touch on the emotional and social literacy that students were missing out on through being with each other. And I'm sure in any of your settings, you will have seen that student wellbeing has been on the decline. Cases of mental health struggles and student wellbeing just really coming to the forefront. And obviously, again, it's those disadvantaged students who are held most at ransom, really, to this. And we know that, unsurprisingly, schools with higher proportions of FSM have shown greater declines in attainment than their more advantaged peers. So what are we going to do about this? Well, fortunately, the ESU has broken down this brilliant skill set, and I think this is great, because we know that language and communication are completely key at every stage of education, but that also impacts on how prepared they're going to be to participate in the wider world around them as well. And the ESU has been able to rationalise the knowledge and understanding of what oracy is and develop 4 strands of skills. And I think this is great. And I think this really helpfully summarises what we need to support students in doing. And by developing these skills explicitly, we're also able to support our students' wellbeing. If you can communicate better, you are able to feel more part of the community, and you feel like you're appreciated, you feel like you have a sense of belonging. We're able to help them with their academic abilities, but also their personal successes as well. That one about wellbeing and confidence, really interesting when you look at perhaps some of those students who have experienced poverty for a long time, or who come from those houses that aren't book or literacy rich. students are missing out on talk. And though that time when we were shut down, so many students would have missed out on proper communication. And I see that in the corridors sometimes when I have students who are talking, but they're not talking to one another. And actually what's happening is they're having words and conversations that seem to be on the same topic, but actually they can't listen and respond to what they're hearing. They can't discuss what they're saying effectively. And because they can't do that, they can't reason, they can't support what they're saying, and they can't even prioritize their thinking. And I think that's a really important factor that we've got to remember as we go. It's not just, though, the ESU and the APPG recognising the importance of oracy and making these rationalisations and recommendations. I mean, we as a profession have known about this for a long time. And now it's finally being filtered through to our classrooms and our programmes and study as well. And that has come through from the DfE's early career framework, and the fact that the teacher standards are currently being rewritten as well. And we know that oracy has and always continues to be an all-encompassing term, which is often linked to literacy. And I do think that literacy and oracy need to go hand in hand, and often do. But oracy, as we know, generally comes first. If you can talk about that, you are then able to explore those more complex ideas, and then be able to express them in that writing. But if you can't think it, you're definitely not going to be able to be writing about it later. And what's quite good about the DfE's early career framework, but also the teacher standards changing, is it recognises the important role that we in schools and schools themselves have in breaking the cycle of language difficulties and also disadvantage by improving this. And we can see that in the teacher standards. It also, though, sees a reframing of the importance in an MPQLL, a literacy, leading literacy. And I know that some of you, when you came in today, you said you had that literacy lead hat on as well. And in that, the MPQLL states that an excellent literacy leader also works on developing pupils' spoken language. So spoken language really comes as a key theme and a key thread through that MPQLL there. And it talks about when you go through the whole programme of study for what you would cover, it wants the people taking part in that, those literacy leaders, to make sure that they are developing pupils' language and vocabulary as a practitioner, and making sure that they're providing and developing high quality talk in the classroom, but as well, and not only just the speaking and but the listening as well. And that's so fundamental to good oracy and sharing of ideas, and also making sure that that high quality talk is prioritized in the classroom. And that's really exciting, I think, because it shows us that we have to be able to put that at the forefront. And also, again, with this MPQLL, quite excitingly, it isn't just about that, but it's also about making sure that practitioners in classrooms are equipped with the skills to identify students who might have language learning difficulties, and then, as a result of that, would have had significant impact on their ability to access the curriculum. So it really wants to guide literacy leaders into being able to have the tools to support student learning and their understanding. And this is important, isn't it? Because actually, the element, though, that carries the most weight, I mean, this is lovely, we all know that this is true. And sometimes, sadly, the element that kind of makes your SLT really focus in on is how Ofsted are picking up on this now as well. So we've prior to the pandemic and previously on what's been going on in Ofsted and HMI's inspections, is that oracy has always been referenced, but it's usually been tied in with literacy, and it's often been mentioned as, you know, if you work on oracy, your school improvement plan and needs to be targeted there as well. It's often talked about as a way of improving literacy, and I know lots of you will have known Pi Corbett and his Talk for Learning and Talk for Writing and all of those kind of elements as well. And there's lots of mentions in Ofsted reports about teacher talk and pupils talking, and also why that's so important for them. About 3-4 weeks ago, we had a visit from our own school improvement partner, who came in to sit in one of my Year 11 lessons, which was wonderful, particularly when he stayed for about 15-20 minutes when I was told it would just be a brief check-in, perhaps have a little nosy at some students' books. However, he stayed for a solid 15 minutes. He sat down at the back of the room, made himself comfortable with his notebook, and we were discussing conflict, the theme of conflict in Macbeth. So, fortunately though, what came out of this conversation was praise for the discussion that we were having and this feedback. And what he really liked about it was the depth of conversation that we were having, and it was a way to explore complex ideas. One of my students brilliantly suggested that part of Macbeth's inner conflict came from the fact that he was originally a soldier rather than a leader. And instead of just letting that great idea go, we kind of delved into it a little bit further. We questioned this kind of idea. Well, what do you mean by that? We bounced that along around a classroom, and more on practical strategies later. But I'm sure these are all things that you do anyway. And I was just thinking, well, actually, if this is something that's being highlighted by our school improvement partner, well, I mean, all that's really going to mean is that actually this is going to become an increasingly looked at thread that Ofsted are looking for when they come and visit us. So we know morally it's the right thing to do. We know that it affects students' understanding of the world around them. And you know, if Ofsted want it, hopefully that allows you to go back to your senior leaders, your team members, and kind of say, well, this is why it's so important that we focus on this. But it's not just that, is it? It's also being reflected in our programmes of study. So we have a look at the national curriculum, and we would expect that a communication subject like English, which is always so well tied in with literacy as well, that we carry that brunt of literacy and that implicit oracy as well. But you can see here how the national curriculum emphasises speaking and listening, supporting, you know, students' cognitive, social and linguistic development. But it also reiterates this message that it's fundamental for them to be able to understand and access the curriculum around them. So spoken language not only is important for them so and self-confidence, but it's a vehicle to allow them to access the whole curriculum in and outside of English. You know, you've got to be a person that has the skills to participate fully in wider society, because pupils who don't speak effectively, who don't read and write fluently and confidently, are effectively being disenfranchised. But we kind of expect that in English, I think, perhaps stereotypically or generalizing. But it's not just English where we find this. And I go across to what I kind of feel almost is like the diametrically opposed subject to English. And I'm sure there would be mathematicians who would be rolling their eyes at me, but one of these kind of non-communication subjects. And it's there as well, even in maths, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, even in maths, we can see that spoken language is a tool to accessing their ability to do maths, basically, and that quality and variety of language that pupils can hear, being able to present mathematical justifications, argument or proof, but also, again, if they can talk about it, they're going to be able to do it. And so with all of this in mind, and how vital speaking and listening is to our students, what does that actually mean for us as subject leads, literacy leads and classroom practitioners? What I'd really like to do here is I would love for us to start thinking about what this means for us in our own classrooms as well. And the fact that, you know, like me, when we came back to our real life classrooms, the disruptions of the closer were just so obvious, and it just becomes like another taxing demand. So there was that kind of focus on lost learning and the increased gaps and all of those things. But there's this really real classroom dichotomy between covering all the necessary content and skills that we've got to get through, particularly when we've had so much lost learning or time in the not lost from the classroom, rather, I think would be a better way of phrasing that. But also making sure that they've got the content, the skills to be able to complete their external assessments, but at the same time trying to do the thing that we know is right and fundamental for students' recovery, which is giving them the opportunity to talk, to ameliorate this widened language and talk gap and that further disadvantage that's come from there. So I guess the thing is really, how do we balance this? And it's this point I'd love to hear from you and have some of your thoughts as well. What does this mean for you in your school? And I know you've probably heard quite a lot from me so far. Where are you starting your journey? Like, think about your own setting. Has your school finally recognised oracy as important? Are you here off with your own back, or has somebody suggested this is CPD that would be useful for you? What do your students actually need? Do you have a really strong culture of speaking and listening within your school where it's recognised, or is that something that still needs to be developed? Within your own department, as a department lead or even as a classroom practitioner, are you already starting to think about how your curriculum, or are you building in opportunities for speaking and listening, oracy and all of those things? What's actually already happening? So it'd be really great to hear from some of you, because obviously we're talking about speaking and listening. So we wonder if you wanted to unmute yourself and over the mics, and then raise your hand, and Steve will say when it's over to you, really. So it'd be great if I could hear from some of you and about what you're doing, where you are, and what your journey looks like currently. If everyone is brave enough. If you're not feeling so super brave.
I don't mind going.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Sorry, my video is not working, but I mean, for us at the moment, I'm part of a school that's part of a trust. We've got 2 secondary schools and 3 primary schools, and the executive head teacher would like to implement kind of oracy across the trust. They understand that not in a way that it looks exactly the same in every single school, because, for example, obviously the primary schools and secondary schools are different, but then also the 2 secondary schools, one's girls and one's boys. So what that might look like might be different, but they would like to implement those kind of foundations and the ideals across the trust and kind of place oracy at the centre more of kind of each school's learning and each school's kind of classroom teaching.
That's really exciting then, actually, to have that kind of opportunity to be looking at how you might develop this. Sorry, there obviously times of COVID and coughing and all the rest of it. That's really interesting, and we'll look at some strategies that you might be able to implement that can be used in different ways, in a more pastoral role, so they don't necessarily have to be directly in one particular subject. And we can also have a look at some other ways that practitioners across the whole curriculum and all subjects can also be supporting oracy. So hopefully there'll be some practical strategies later on that you'll be able to feedback and look at that whole wider approach to it. But it really great, and I mean, that's fantastic to hear that your exec is already kind of saying we need to bring oracy more fundamentally into the middle. And actually it's very similar to my own trust that we all seem to be an academy trust these days. We're 1 secondary school, about 5 primary schools, and 1 sixth form college, there is rumblings, there's discussions and talk, particularly in the primary sector, about how we can support the oracy of students. So it's more felt there, and I sometimes think that once you get to secondary and obviously into college and Key Stage 5, the focus ends up being on content as well. So thank you, Matthew, for sharing that. Is there anyone else who'd like to talk about where they are or where their school is?
Kat, I just wanted to raise a point. I think that cross-phase piece that Matthew just picked up on is really interesting, because we know that the sooner you start developing oracy skills, the better. So understanding whether you're in a trust that has primaries and secondaries or not, that needs to understand what's happening before young people transition, I think is going to be vital.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also the opportunities that present themselves in primary schools and being able to explore talk and language in many more creative ways is only going to set those students off onto a path where expectations of oracy, they don't become an expectation, they just become part and parcel of what you do every day, and they just become a fundamental part of your learning journey. So thank you, Matthew, for that. It's a really interesting point. Perhaps you are in slightly different spaces where you might be developing your more what's the word I'm looking for, your kind of competitive speaking listening or your debate club. I noticed that someone was saying that they earlier on in the poll that there is a debate club has been started, which sounds really good, and a head of geography there, so we can talk about that most definitely later on. And it's really good to see, you know, we've got people there with a spoken word coordinator, Matthew, yourself, as well. Everyone's there. Okay, let's move on then to think about actual practical strategies then, because I think that must be where we're up to then, if we have an understanding of where you are. And it'd be really nice, and perhaps you might want to add those other ideas into the chat as well, if perhaps you weren't really that comfortable working your mic, or perhaps your mic wasn't working either. Do pop them in the chat if there's anything that you think would be useful for us to know, because the better I understand where your starting point is, the better and more tailored my kind of advice, support, suggestions could be. And I really hope that you take these as suggestions, really. And as we move on then, dialogue around oracy really seems the most natural way to explore how we can develop this further. So again, you know, if there's anything else you want to put in the chat, please do. So whatever your starting point is currently, I'd like to share some of the strategies that maybe for some of you just timely reminders as we reflect and review on the current schemes of learning that you're writing, or our curriculums that you've completed over this year. And it may also just, you know, confirm to you that some of the things that you're already doing are right, and you've already got that understanding there. And I think sometimes one of the most valuable things that comes away from CPD, be it in your own schools or in those days where you get to meet others from different schools or institutions, or even different key stages as well, is that confirmation that we're all on the right track. We're all kind of banging that same drum. And I hope that some of these strategies will do that for you. At any point, if you want to ask me any questions, please just feel if you want to unmute yourself and ask me in the next section. That would be really helpful as well. So what do we do? How do we get started? And I think the first thing that we look at is this implicit and explicit teaching of oracy in our setting. And one of the biggest things that we can do is, and one of the easiest ones, and I think probably everyone does this when you're doing your teacher training, as part of your teacher standards, it's there, isn't it? It's about how you use your questioning and making sure that you're not accepting those short monosyllabic answers, and where you know a student just says, yeah, ambition, when you've asked them all about, you know, what's driving Macbeth in this part of the scene, or whatever that might be. And having that modelling there is so important, isn't it? And we know that when it comes to good writing, we know that when we teach writing, we make sure that we kind of pick out those best parts of it, and we make that assessment criteria really clear to them. We've got to do the same when we are doing this in lessons. And sometimes it's just about having responses tucked up your sleeves as well. You know, oh, did you mean this actually when you said that? Or another thing that I find quite useful as well, when I see a student circling an idea, is giving them that idea, sort of saying, you know, well, would the word juxtaposition help here, or, you know, would it be useful to use the word hubris here, or something like that, and then giving them that opportunity to use that language, and again helping them to embed that and extend their vocabulary, and well, there'll be more on vocabulary in just a moment as well. But there's also another thing that we can be doing, and this is that general patter that we have in the classroom. And this is something that's not obviously just tied to English, and can be used across a whole range of subjects as well. And it's actually praising those spoken language skills. And what they are doing. So for example, yesterday in my year 8, a student was talking about Simon's death in Lord of the Flies, and they said something along the lines of, it seems like Golding wanted to contrast Simon's goodness with the other boys' savagery. And savagery was a word that we've been using in our discussion anyway, so I was like, yeah, great use of that term, savagery there, that's brilliant. But actually, after I said that, my bigger praise went to the fact that they'd used the phrase, it seems like Golding is. And that kind of leads on to my next idea that we've got here, and it's about making sure we are giving our students the language and the vocabulary to write, to discuss and talk about our subjects as well, as you'll see, as a student of literature, as a scientist, a historian, as a mathematician, and giving them those opportunities to be able to discuss our subject effectively, and making sure that we do that there. Because this can be very, very simply just by giving them specific vocabulary. And again, this will be things that you're doing often implicitly, but it's often just moving it into the explicit range, isn't it? Making sure that we understand this is exactly what I want you to be doing, and also modeling that type of talk as well. And this becomes even more important when we remember that spoken language gets them to practice these things, to secure their understanding of these difficult or challenging concepts that we're looking at prior to writing or prior to completing a task or an extended piece of writing. One thing that I think is really important, again, though, is thinking about that assessment criteria. If you want them to be using specific keywords, make that really, really clear to them. We do this regularly when we teach different genres of writing. We do this really often as completely natural when we teach different genres, when we look at different conventions. But it's about making sure that we can transfer those skills across to oracy, because oracy doesn't just get sponged in effectively, or at least not to the extent that we think that would happen for our students. And we can also see this, particularly when you think about those students who do come from those deprived backgrounds, who don't have good quality talk at home. If they don't get it at home, then it's our job as classroom practitioners to make sure that we're putting that in there for them as well. Now, the next idea, and this perhaps will link into, Matthew, what you were saying before, about making sure that there are opportunities for explicit oracy teaching. And this can be done in lots and lots of different ways. So these are just some strategies that I've been implementing in my own setting, that I've seen work in other settings as well. Now, this came about really because in my school, due to timetabling and split classes, I was presented with the opportunity, I won't say the word challenge, but the opportunity of having a 1 hour a fortnight with 2 year 8 classes, 2 different year 8 classes. I'm not their main teacher. I don't have the same relationships with them. And it was a bit of a way of buying in, because actually the library lessons that I was meant to be supporting with weren't necessarily particularly effective for these 2 classes. And actually, quite wisely though, in hindsight, these no pen style lessons could actually supplement library lessons if that's something that happens in your setting. So I sold them to my lovely excitable year 8s as no pen lessons, but actually what I was doing was making sure that I was giving them opportunities for a whole range of different types of talk. And when we have a look at some of the strategies that I've got on the next slide as well, I'll show you what I've looked at. It's not been easy all the way, but what I found was that these no pen lessons needed ground rules. And to begin with, students were excitable. They were, I don't know if any of you colleagues who teach English have also taught drama. And those first few lessons are when you're in a drama studio or on a stage or in a hall, and you suddenly don't have the security of a desk. There was this kind of similar kind of feel and buzz in the air where there was no security of a pen and a book in front of them. So it was really important that we established those very fundamental basics about, well, what do we need to do? There's got to be some ground rules. But there was also then an onus on me to point out that if we're having these no pen lessons, it's not just having a jolly time, it's also about making sure that I'm flagging up the skills that we are working on. So it's making that oracy link absolutely explicit. And every lesson, I must sound like a broken record to them quite often. I'm saying to them, in 2022, the way you communicate is fundamental to how you are going to succeed in the world around you. And again, thinking about my students in my school, I talk about, you know, students who want to be lawyers. Yes, of course, that makes sense. Of course, if I want to be a doctor, I need to understand and take in lots and lots of talk and be able to process it and prioritize it and then feedback. But I think for my students, and it depends again on your setting and your own demographic that you teach, flagging up to them, actually mechanics need to be able to talk and work as part of a team. They need to communicate. They have to have those interpersonal skills, which comes from good oracy. So you can see here some of the lessons that I did. I had great fun in doing a few lessons on zombie apocalypses, and so you can see there's a range of tasks here so this would maybe be about one lesson depending on how effectively they've done that as well, but the zombie lesson was often my buy-in to kind of get them excited, bearing in mind the year 8 boy heavy year group as well. So I gave them a clip that I'd shamelessly borrowed from the video game Dying Light. Don't worry if you find this specific part of it, the trailer of it, there's no gore, there's no violence in it, it's just framing the scene. And actually it introduced a scenario, but I had to then ask them questions to make sure that they'd listened effectively to what the problem was. And then you can see a couple of the scenarios that I gave them. So, you know, in groups of 4, and to begin with, I let them choose their groups because I needed them to buy in, I needed them to be with me, I needed them to be enjoying themselves. They had to decide what items that they were going to take from the ones up on the board there, and they had to kind of, again, think about how they're going to work as a group. And you might not be able to see it depending on the size of your screen, but the things I was looking for, I flagged it up really clearly. I'm looking for turn taking, I'm looking for listening, I was looking for the questioning, for clarification, also taking a lead, because you often have those children who are quite passive, but given the right stimulus and the right setting, they can find that kind of confidence. And I was really interested, there was a couple of students who I thought would hate doing this, actually beginning to shine. Depending on the classes, this also worked in combination with a bit of a reward for when I saw that good work merit, or sometimes we do raffle tickets with a prize draw at the end of the lesson as well, to keep them engaged, to keep them working together. Then obviously choosing a weapon, incredibly important if you're going to be facing a zombie apocalypse. But again, this one was about persuasion. And then we worked in a group, and then we fed back to the whole classes as well. There was also the opportunity for role play talk. I don't always know how I feel about role play. I know as an adult, whenever I have to go to any kind of CPD, or even when I've taught drama before and it says on the scheme of learning, teacher in role, my heart sinks a little bit. So this could be done in different ways. And sometimes when I say a no pen lesson, the other thing that I get them doing is writing on the tables with board markers. And again, I only give 1 pen to each group, but it means that they're talking, they're communicating with each other. So if you're thinking about a whole school approach, perhaps this is something that can be worked into a unit of work that sits alongside the curriculum. Perhaps this becomes part of your English curriculum in different ways. We've done this in different ways before, like a drop-down day, we would call it, where one day we're off timetable and students carousel through a range of activities. And it just so happens now that this works really well. And again, you can see that final slide there, a but wait moment, giving them moral dilemmas. So not only is it talk for talk's sake, it's also that opportunity to discuss complex ideas, philosophical ideas, and dilemmas. So what, you know, someone's been keeping a secret. The boys were very, very quick to shout, fine, you kill them. And then stereotypically and generalizing in many ways, sometimes it was the quieter members of the class, or the girls often, who would say, well, it depends on who it would be. And by giving them that moment, you're intertwining all of those kind of like philosophy and emotional literacy as well. Obviously, it's not all about zombies all the time, but the good old balloon debate works really well. And again, as these lessons have continued, I've chosen the groups for the students and ways to do that. And I'm sure you know how to put children in groups, but I will put sort of like a wedding seating plan up on the board, and all I've done is gone around the room. I've written numbers on tables randomly, so 1 and 2 don't sit together and things like that, and they come in, they have to find their table, and they're going to work with a new group that time as well. So we've done things like I said, the balloon debate, we've done our zombie apocalypse, we've done room 101 about persuasion and looking at those persuasive language techniques as well. But this has also led to something slightly more formalised. First, we started with paired presentations, which is also going to be leading further on in the next term to solo presentations, which some students feel more confident about, but it's still about breaking those boundaries. They're happy to contribute to class discussion, but when you put them on the spot, or when you put them in the spotlight rather, actually that kind of changes. But we need to change that feeling and those expectations as well. So that can sit alongside or within your English curriculum, or however you might want to make that work for you. And that could go quite far. There's lots of resources on the ESU website as well, which we'll talk about a little bit later as we go. We mentioned before about the importance of vocabulary. And I'm sure lots of you, again, if you are from a communications English background, but even in your geography subjects and your specific subjects, if you'd rather, that language and that terminology that sometimes we expect students to have. So another factor of what we need to do is explicitly teach vocabulary. And I thought what was really interesting was this focus on tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary. Generally, as secondary school practitioners, we are going to have an ability to talk, we're going to have an ability with language, we have been exposed to higher level vocabulary. And sometimes we put it on our knowledge organisers, but actually, how are we using it? What are we doing with it? And it's about making sure that our children really understand what these words mean and how to use them through discussion, through exposure to them. Recently, I was reading Catherine Mortimer's Disciplinary Literacy and Explicit Vocabulary Teaching book, which is another interesting one for those literacy leads out there. And it really reminded me that giving them that prior vocabulary teaching before they encounter the word in context actually allows them to understand that word even better. Now, for me as an English teacher, reading often stereotypically in a generalized way, lots of lovely narratives, I want them to have the magic of language. But actually, that's going to do my students a disservice if they're already on the back foot and don't understand what's going on in the text and things like that. If I'm telling them what this word means before they come up against it in the text, when they do see it in context, their understanding is so much deeper and so much richer. So there's lots of different ways to teaching vocabulary previously. Like I said, sometimes you'll have it on your knowledge organizer, and some of you may have seen Freya models, but I've also mentioned here dual coding as well, and you see that in lots and lots of different ways in lots of different places. Some of you might have experience of Sherrington and Cavaglioni's walkthroughs. Some of you may know Stuart Pike, who's very generous over Twitter, sharing his resources, and also highlights the effectiveness of dual coding as well there. So when I talk about a Freya model, this is what I mean, and you can give them the definition, you can give them the opportunities to write their own definition, give them opportunities to write synonyms, antonyms, and things like that, and also tie in this dual coding here. I'm going to show you some examples of how this has worked in my own classroom. And you can see here, this is my second set year 11s talking about masculinity in Macbeth. Again, you can see that they've written their own definitions, qualities or attributes regarding the characteristics of a man. We have guilt as well there. And you can see that they've written their own definitions. They've got synonyms, so they've understood and explored this intangible abstract noun and idea, and then you can see their lovely little images. And by year 11 they don't have to be these wondrous works of art, but just something to help them really secure this vocabulary. If you give them the words to use, they're going to be able to use them if we give them that opportunity. That's a second set year 11, and many of you may teach in mixed ability classes. It works just as well here. I'm going to show you my lower set, my lower prior attaining year 9s here, who are a very, very sweet class. There's a lot of prior learning that happens that go on in our lessons, and you can see here 3 examples of what I've got. Now at the top there, you can see how the Freya model is quite helpful for an EAL student. And we're looking at the Merchant of Venice, and we're looking at intolerance, and they were going to be doing an assessment on intolerance. So I thought it was probably bally important that they understood what the word intolerance and intolerant meant and could use effectively it in their assessments later on. So because of the nature of the class, we discussed what we would the word intolerance, and I did support them in writing their own definitions by giving them some options that had come out of our class discussion. So again, they're generating the idea through their idea through our discussion. I'm tweaking it, I'm tailoring it, I'm giving them the opportunity to have the more sophisticated language. For example, when I've taught Macbeth to my lower prior attaining year 10s currently, looking at Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's discussion about why he should go through with it. And one of them saying, well, she's calling him a wetty, isn't she, when she's challenging his masculinity. And I'm like, completely right concept. But the word that you need here is she's emasculating him. And then we had that discussion about that word and the reminder that wetty's fine when we're talking about it, but really because we're not going to use that word in an essay. I'm highlighting code shifting, I'm highlighting a switch and register here. I'm also highlighting the demands of the different formats, talk versus writing. We're developing that vocabulary as you go. And you can see these wonderful images here of Antonio spitting on Shylock. And you can see as well how in the bottom right hand corner you have a very happy person and a very sad person, and getting to make sure that they're using that language in context as well to deal with some of the ideas. So I always try to get them to write a sentence using that word linked to the text as well. And interestingly, we completed a pause point lesson last week as we finished this intolerance topic and the merchant topic. And they knew they had learnt this word because I had explicitly discussed this vocabulary with them. And for them, that pre-teaching, that over-teaching, and that dual coding is so beneficial to those students. And that this class in particular, this lower prior attaining year 9 set, definitely were put at a disadvantage, a further disadvantage during our school closures from the disadvantaged place where they already started anyway. So obviously there's some ideas that you can use specifically in your own classroom, but what about those kind of like whole school curriculum or whole school approaches as well? Now, I've worked as a literacy lead in this school for the last 6 years as well, and our school strategy has often changed and adapted and responded to our students' needs as well it should. So actually, what we've developed now is making sure that there's high quality discussion during form time, and this is supported through a range of non-fiction texts. And we've called it the written world. One, because what English teacher doesn't like a bit of alliteration, but actually it was trying to get them to engage with the world around them. And for us as a school, and you would have heard of that term cultural capital. For us, cultural capital wasn't about them knowing that there were countries that were once called Rhodesia or Siam, or being able to list 10 Baroque architects. That wasn't our that wasn't our cultural capital. For us, cultural capital meant that our students could engage with the world around them, that they understood current affairs and they weren't afraid of engaging with current affairs. So what I do every half term is I find a range of topical non-fiction texts, and depending on your school budgets, you might want to buy in things like This Week is a school newspaper, and there's lots of other kind of resources out there, but news, world affairs. Sometimes I found a website called Newsella, which was recommended to me by somebody else, where you can access them for free, but often with an American slant, so you've got to be quite thoughtful when you're curating those. There are often New Scientist articles, or even National Geographic Kids articles that are suitable. And so what I provide, and I'm going to show that to you as well, is the article, which all teachers can access. All form tutors do this on whatever day that they are designated the written world. They tend to read it with their students, either to their students or get their students to take turns, depending on the need of their form group. And also part of this was empowering people who were not English specialists to be able to talk about them. And I think that's really hard when you're trying to create something as a literacy lead, when you have those, and I'm just talking from my own experiences here, science or maths teachers telling me, well, actually, well, that's English's point of view, isn't it? That's English to do that. Why am I having to pick out spelling mistakes? Why am I struggling to do this? Why do I have to engage with this? Particularly when we used to have a whole school-wide DEAR campaign, drop everything and read, you know, non-subject specialists kind of saying, well, I don't know how to question children on this language, and things like that. So they're supported with discussion and literacy prompts, and each session lasts maybe 25, 30 minutes there. And you can see what's here. But what I thought was really important, referencing Ofsted before, was the education inspection framework highlights personal development, and in their good indicator it talks about the school providing pupils with meaningful activities to understand how to be responsible, respectful citizens, and so you can see there it's about discussing and debating issues in a considered way, and this is really a good one for it. So you can see here the types of things that we look at, engagement from a whole range of non-fiction topics, and also discussion around that topic, some helpful YouTube clips, TED Talks, all of those things, allowing students to engage with them. And this was some of this term's work that you can see there. It's an opportunity to discuss gender equality, you know, that not so discreet or not so hidden agenda of you need to be reading to support yourself in school. Also opportunities for them to talk about the world around them. And I know some settings might use Newsround to help that. I'm a Year 8 tutor. Newsround's great for me. But also some of the articles help to support those middle and lower prior retaining students in Year 9, 10 and 11 anyway. And I did forget to mention that the programme is for all year groups, and so again that's why the questioning is kind of some of it is very much recall from what they've heard in the article or talked about in the article, but also there is that debate and discussion. You know, if we look at Nelson Mandela, do you think there is still racial separation in the world today? You can also think about with women like Mulan, should we study archaeology and the remains of the dead, or should we just leave them alone? So giving them those opportunities to debate higher order thinking as well. Now we talk about debate, and almost cyclically in full circle, this is where I come back to. This is where I started. My love of debating and speaking and talking and oracy comes from my work when I was 16 with the ESU. In an ESU report there, we can see that that student spoken communication skills can be enhanced by making sure that they are able to take part in structured debate. And go back to considering that levelling the playing field. Public speaking and debate has generally often been the tool, the area, the arena, the forum of white, middle class, upper class men. And so being able to give students the opportunity to find their voice is so important and so integral to what we do. And I mentioned before how my own school, we are never oversubscribed, shall I say that? We're never a school that's oversubscribed. And we have got, as I said, 3 other secondary schools, plus 3 private schools, independent schools within our very small market town. And when I was really lucky that for me, we were the ESU, the local branch invited some teachers and, you know, can we get you involved in the public speaking? And I think sometimes public speaking competitions and clubs seem like the icing on the cake to having that debating society, but it is possible regardless of your demographic if you structure it and implement it well. So about 5-6 years ago, my school didn't have a single team, so I started inviting my HPA Year 11 students. Then it turned into my Year 10 and my Year 11s as well, to make sure I had teams to enter into the ESU Churchill Public Speaking. And then I got my Year 10s, 11s to bring their friends, so they had a bit of an audience as well. And then it's been opened up to, you know, I've got to all year groups, and this has been incremental. This has been year on year. I had public speaking today, and we did some really fun games about taking part or just expressing yourself. I gave them that lorem ipsum decorum, that text, you know, the bit that's always in pre-filled, and it was about just delivering it in an effective way, which was quite entertaining. They then also had and that is how it's got its name, another game where they just had to talk and explain how different items got their names. And it was really interesting when a boy today, a year 9 boy, who actually isn't necessarily the most literate student. He's not always, he's your middle to low prior retaining student, but very, very quick. And he talked about how the top hat had originated from 4000 BC after a caveman wanted to look much more dapper, and how it had been originally a log, and then it was covered with animal fur. And then one day he was feeling very happy and excited, so he was playing his hat drum on the top of the cliff before he fell off. But all the people around him had heard the topper 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 sound of his drum, hence the name, the top hat, and that is how it got its name. And there's lots of activities like this if you're starting a public speaking club, available on the ESU website, and that's where we started. So not only was I using the ESU resources that they have there, we actually had a Discover Your Voice workshop come into our school, which was really great for us, and that was really helpful. And you can see again what this looks like here. You can see some of the things that they've got there. Oops, I flipped a bit too fast there. And there's lots and lots of things up there, all linked into the different ESU skill sets, which is so great and so helpful for us and easily developed. And you can see some of the kind of activities that I do in my little public speaking forum group. And there's mixtures of tasks and topics. But this part of it is about starting to develop the effectiveness of their speaking abilities, and also giving it that kind of sense of prestige. And for my students who look at these 3 private schools, these students who other schools where those students have lots more money and lots more opportunities, and there's a real sense of an us and them, letting them feel like they can compete on the same playing field as them is absolutely brilliant. And it's even meant, and I'll get onto this, that last year I had a team that won the ESU Churchill public speaking final competition. We went to London. They won when we were online. We've been to the House of Lords, so they could be given their trophy. And it's been brilliant. And the buzz that we have around our school, and part of their success has also gone on to raise the profile of my own public speaking club. And as you could see previously there, some of the kind of activities that we take part in it. And actually for me, my next steps are to make sure I further my links with my independent colleagues, because obviously I've got to know them through the public speaking sector rounds as well. And what we wanted to kind of develop is a culture of debating meets, like fortnightly or things like that. And what we wanted to do, we were talking about this last time, we let students out to go to sportings fixtures, which is very good and it's wonderful and has so many benefits as well. But let's start doing that for speaking and listening as well, and spoken language also. If you go online to the ESU YouTube channel, the impact that this has had on my students, if you go in there and you can find an embarrassing clip that I'm in as well, they talk about how this has impacted them and how much confidence it's brought them and how much that success has continued to help breed their success. And they've gone on to take part now in the MACE, and they're still debating, and it's been wonderful to watch their confidence blossom and grow as we've gone on. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the things that might be helpful to you. It would be really great now to think about what about you, and where are we going to go with this? How are you going to use what we've talked about today effectively? What are you going to take away? And it'd be really great if we could have this discussion here. And I'm happy if you want to do this as a mixture of unmuted mics, or if you wanted to put your ideas into chat. And perhaps it's one of those where you think about, well, what are you going to take forward from today, perhaps? Or maybe you might have had your priorities put into a slightly different perspective, perhaps. But also I think what's important is, what are your barriers? How can you overcome those things? I know that for one of the biggest issues that we have is time in the curriculum, and making sure that we build that in. So at this point, it'd be really great if there's anyone who'd like to unmute their mics, talking about where you are in your journey, and also think about what is it that you can take away today? What have you learned? What will you be implementing? Where are your priorities? So it'd be lovely to hear from you.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
My name's Rebecca, and I'm head of department at St Mary's Carn, which is a independent boarding school for girls. There's barely any debate culture at our school, which I find really shocking. And the girls are they're quite sort of quiet and reserved, and I want to change that. So I suppose we're right at the beginning of our journey in terms of debating, and like you, it's time. It's where do you fit the bloody thing in when you've got, you know, so many other commitments and priorities. So we so far we have we couldn't get anyone from the ESU to come in. No one got back to me, so we used DebateMate, who came in and did a kind of I don't know, a 2-hour workshop on what debating is, and so, you know, some very preliminary starters. So from now, I suppose it's what do we do next? It's start a debating club like you have. I think that's a brilliant idea, to meet every fortnight, and then try and. I was thinking we're going to have to weave in debating activities into our schemes of work. But how often that needs to happen? What's the optimum sort of time? You know, does it have to happen every week, or can that be every fortnight? I'm not sure. So I'm here today to learn, really.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on your kind of your demographic, your children, your needs as well. And I think there's two things at play there. Already the fact that you don't have that culture of speaking and public speaking particularly, and then in a kind of stereotypical generalized way, girls not wanting to talk, and there's something that needs to be unpicked there as well. I think about girls sometimes feeling disenfranchised and that their voices don't matter, and I think some roots into this. In my previous school, we started a girls club, and it was called Our Voice, and we used that and we looked at how girls perhaps and gender equality often affected self-image, and it's a very, very old clip on YouTube now, but if you search Dove Evolution, there is a video of a model going into a photo shoot, and it's everything, how she goes in, you know, she's got blemishes on her skin and all the rest of it, and it shows you how makeup, hair, lighting, and then the post-production editing creates this kind of like very unnatural expectation and representation. And that became a good starting point for discussion. And I think sometimes it's meeting your students on their level first, like what's their problem, and by externalizing this idea about self-confidence, they don't have to talk about themselves necessarily. So that might be a route that you take in there with your debating club. And I mean that's more of a different style of club, but could be part of a debating club. Depending on what your students are like and where you are, that prestige, all the competitions are closed now, but the competitions open again in about September, October time. And if you've registered your interest with the ESU, you'll start getting those emails through. And so that's one way of challenging your HPA students, is giving them those opportunities. There's loads of resources on the ESU's YouTube channel that shows previous types of talk and types of competition and candidates, which might allow your students to say, actually, we can do that. And that might be one thing to do there as well. If it's also a school-wide concern or phenomena, perhaps that might be something to look at cross-curricularly. How are all subjects giving opportunities for students to talk? How are they highlighting? And I understand it's those very, very quiet classrooms, isn't it, that are really difficult, sometimes more difficult than classrooms where students are off task or looking for distraction, when they seem very apathetic and very, very passive. And I think it's one of those, it's two things: providing the opportunities, but also just chipping away at them bit by bit, and perhaps empowering your other colleagues to recognise those by reframing student experience in the classroom. I loved it when you said this. I heard how you said, oh, I want to build on from so-and-so's point. Love that. Great speaking and listening technique. That's fantastic. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a big whole school wide thing straight away, but it's just changing that culture, I think, and shifting the balance from we want quiet classrooms to actually sometimes noise and interest can be quite useful as well. Was there anything else that you might want to ask or on the back of that, or?
Not at the moment. That was yeah, you made a few good points there, actually. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Shireen, you've unmuted. Would you like to ask or contribute here?
Yeah, I think I've got a similar thing. I started a debate club last term for year 9s. I had 2 girls coming in and like 9 boys, a really enthusiastic group. My only issue was, and something that I noticed, was that they really did struggle with articulating their ideas. Even though they're really enthusiastic, you could just tell they just kept falling over what vocabulary they should use. They get a little bit frustrated sometimes, but they love debate. We debated so many, everything that was on the news. I tried to put it into into the debate. So the strategies I was really after was, I guess, like the literacy focus, just on the vocabulary. And maybe now I'm thinking maybe what I should do is start them with like a speaking frame, maybe make it a bit more formal, just to help them out.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Like you say, you know, just to help them out, and it's giving them that kind of empowerment. And I don't I think you also are an English teacher, perhaps. I can't remember.
Geography, yeah, geography.
Geography.
Yeah.
So you'll be giving them writing frames, and other times when you want them to write in a specific way. And sometimes just those phrases like, do you think, and giving them those and highlighting them. And do you model it to them as well?
Yeah, so me and the other geography teacher tried to model it to them. So it was, and we did everything on the ESU website. So we did the balloon debate, we do the alley debate. They love it. It's just trying to get them, and I'm trying to convince them that maybe we'll enter a competition. They're not overly enthusiastic. They think the fun will come out of it, which is not what I want really. I want them to have fun. But I think it's also important to be a bit ambitious with it as well. So
the way that I've done that with my little public speaking forum is I have introduced them that parliamentary style debate of this house believes, but I've given them kind of more things like this house believes superheroes have no place in society, or this house believes that fairies, but there are fairies at the bottom of the garden, and giving them opportunities to like have that formal moment, but with low stakes content. And that's quite fun. And so sometimes when I do those sessions, I'll flash up the proposition, this house believes, whatever it might be. Then I get like the spectrum, like you say, you know, which side of the argument are you on, where are you? Then we have one side of the room is opposition, one side is proposition. Then they get into a little team, they have a quick moment of like, oh, what are we going to say? And then they're only allowed to speak once, because that is similar to actually parliamentary style as well. And then it's making them pass it on, and that's been quite nice. And this is the first time in 16 years of being a teacher that I have got a public speaking club of year 7s to year 11s. That has never happened to me before. Because of, like you say, the reluctance sometimes to speak, the fun element is fun, but I don't want to compete. And that might be another thing to unpick, like, is it just the fun? Or for my students in particular, because of the type of school we were, and we are in some ways still, they didn't think that they could compete with the children down the road. They didn't think that they could compete with them, because they were like, well, they're way richer than us, they're smarter than us, how are we going to be able to do that? And some of it had to kind of like, no, don't be ridiculous. Why? They're just using words. Here are the words you need to use. And again, back to the example about Macbeth being a wetty. Oh, actually, he's being emasculated, isn't he? And it's empowering them with that vocabulary, which I think it's a chipping away thing. And I think this is the difficult thing with oracy. Even though it underpins every moment of our lessons, actually, it's so hard to pin down because of that as well. And so I think it's about having that toolkit of strategies that you use. And as we were speaking before with Rebecca, You know, maybe there are things that need to happen as a kind of culture for language and a culture for speaking as well. But I hope that you will take part in some of the ESU. There's MACE, and there's the public speaking Churchill debate, which are really fun to do. It's so fun. And I convinced a friend of mine, she put 2 teams in, and she also works in a school in an area of great deprivation. And she said, you know what? Even it was hard and they didn't get through to the next round, she's still going to have a go at it next year because she could see the value and the ability for them as well.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all right. Was there anyone else who had anything they wanted to ask? I know there were some comments before about not knowing how to deliver in the poll at the very beginning, not knowing how to deliver oracy. I wonder if you are happy either in the chat to extend, do you mean oracy in the classroom, or do you mean oracy on a wider cross-curricular kind of way? It'd be great if you gave me some clarity there, and then I could maybe have a look at that and have a little think about how you might do that. Was there anyone who had really clear barriers to getting this going in your settings at all? Sometimes it can be a confidence thing, perhaps. Sometimes people don't want, you know, even as an adult, we don't necessarily like to put ourselves in those situations where we are leading a discussion or talking or taking on that bigger role. Perhaps if you're not sure how to deliver it, start small. Start with considering how you do things in your own classroom. And I think that's probably the best strategy that you have as a practitioner, regardless of your subject, regardless of the year groups that you teach. If you start doing bits in your classroom and you see that kind of success, the strategies that you there can become incremental. You can try them in different year groups or different settings as well. And that also gives you opportunities to keep developing your own skill set about what works and what doesn't. Please be aware that my no pen lessons do not always have these beautiful articulate speakers who are carefully and considerately taking turns. I mentioned before about having to use the rewarding or using raffle tickets for a prize draw at the end of the lesson. An additional brilliant challenge that I have with that fortnightly class is they're often timetabled period 5 on a Friday, which is joyful for me. But when I have these boy-heavy classes who don't want to work with her over there, and I don't even like her, actually having to have that balance of, okay, let's carry on and let's keep moving forward, but I'm giving you the opportunity to do something really valuable and couching it in something that they're interested in, zombies, football, all those kind of things, can be quite useful. But I do know for myself that I've got to give my girls voices still as well, and that can be incredibly important. Were there any other questions or considering what your priorities are going to be now, or perhaps you might like to tell me what you are going to try in the next half and the next term? Actually, Easter is so close, so very nearly there, colleagues. What are you going to be doing after the Easter holidays that you might have taken away from this evening's session? What do you think you might trial or try to implement, even if it's a small thing, or something perhaps that you might feed back to your colleagues in your own settings? Oh, the written word, yeah, it's brilliant. Honestly, it's great. And I'm more, if please, when these slides will be sent out a bit later on, I believe, via the ESU. But there are so many good resources out there. Frustratingly, some of them are kind of ones that you have to buy into. And there's a lot of this in America. Americans love public speaking, and why we don't as a country do the same as well. But the written word is a fantastic opportunity to engage with so many different things. And actually, I think because the emphasis is on non-fiction, I tend to steer away from anything that's too Englishy, if you like. And so we've looked at how fungi and mycelium can be used as a building tool. And we looked at how that this can have an impact on climate change and things like that. Some of the other topics that we've looked at as well have been about pollution. We've looked at other historical kind of elements as well. And also the historical figures. So the Nelson Mandela one actually came as about after one of my colleagues said, my students don't know who some of these kind of world leaders are. So that's really important as well. Thank you, Matthew. That the idea about why oracy is so important. As I said to you before, like I've said this whenever I've met with people at the ESU and things like that. We've always known how important oracy is, but we don't have the same quantitative data or figures as literacy leads or literacy practitioners or anyone under that literacy heading has. You know, it's very easy to say, well, this child had a reading age of 11 years, 3 months at this point, and when we tested them next year, they've now moved up to 13 years and 6 months, you know, now that they've become a 9. That's really tangible, quantitative, solid proof. How do you evidence this child feels more confident at talking in a lesson now? How do you put that emphasis on there? And so hopefully, again, when that presentation's sent out and you've got some of those facts and figures and there's some data in there, and the one that gets sent out has got some other data which is better to read than have presented to you, and you look at those really frightening statistics of children who come from deprivation and their life chances, you cannot help but feel empowered and perhaps invigorated on your oracy mission. I know that sounds incredibly cheesy, but actually I feel so galvanized by working with the ESU and seeing some of this data coming through. That's been really very, very useful. I appreciate that we're very close to the end of our designated time. And so I'm sure lots of you will be ready to head home after a very busy day, as we all are, and looking forward, crawling towards that Friday and that end of term there. I believe Steve is going to put into the chat a link. Well, we've got some useful resources that are accessible to you when the PowerPoint is sent out to you as well, and some other further interesting things. But I think Steve will send a link to you as well, where you can give us some feedback about what you felt was helpful this evening, what you felt we could have done more of, and how we can better shape this webinar for your other colleagues. So I guess that just leaves me to say thank you so very much for joining me this evening, and thank you for sharing this passion with me as well, because one, it's morally important that we help these kids talk and go further, but secondly, speaking is really fun and it's a really great way to interact with other people and access, you know, the world around you. So thank you so much for your time this evening.
Sorry, I missed the first bit, and thank you very much indeed, Kat. And I look forward to receiving all of the bump.
Brilliant, thank you.